Okay, recording's on. So our agenda for tonight. First, going over some housekeeping items. I'm going to introduce you to our DEQ team. And DEQ will start with our presentation, going over a background of the site and the cleanup remedy. We're going to share some information about the prospective purchaser agreement process and what that means, as well as how our outreach process is going and what those next steps will be. Then you're going to hear from Portland Botanical Gardens about their proposal and vision for the site. And after they're done, we're then going to open up the floor for Q&A and feedback. And you can speak and ask questions to either DEQ, Portland Botanical Gardens, or both. The floor really is going to be open for you. So with that said, I'm going to introduce you to our team from DEQ. So I'm Michael Locke. I am a public affairs specialist focusing on DEQ's Northwest region, which encompasses most of Oregon's Northwest counties, including the Portland metro area. And I'm assisting the DEQ team on this project with communications and community engagement. And next, I'll invite Annie to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Annie Rolfe. I'm a public affairs specialist with the cleanup program at DEQ, and I'm helping with communications on this project, and I'll be moderating the chat.
Thanks, Annie. I'm not sure if the connection was choppy on your end or not, but just in case, yeah, Annie is our cleanup programs public affairs specialist, and she's going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, so she'll be able to help you out if you have questions. Next up, we have Kevin.
Yeah, hi everyone, Kevin Perrett. I'm the DEQ Northwest Region Cleanup Manager who is responsible for the McCormick and Baxter site.
Thanks, Kevin. Next, we have Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller. I am the DEQ Cleanup Project Manager for McCormick and Baxter.
Thanks, Sarah. And last but not least, we have Lorenzo.
Hi, I'm Lorenzo Danielson. I am the Prospective Purchaser Agreement Coordinator and Legal Policy Analyst for the Cleanup Division.
Awesome. Thanks, Lorenzo. Okay, so onto our presentation. I'm going to invite Sarah back to go over the background and the cleanup for the site.
Great, thanks, Michael. You can go to the next slide, please. Right, so McCormick and Baxter operated a 41-acre creosote wood treating facility between 1944 and 1991. And during operations, chemicals were released into soils and groundwater, which were ultimately discharged into the Willamette River. Contaminants of concern include creosote or PAHs, dioxin furans, pentachlorophenol, and metals such as copper, chromium, zinc, and arsenic. McCormick and Baxter filed for bankruptcy in 1990 and ceased operations in 1991. DEQ then assumed responsibility for completing environmental investigations and cleanup activities at the site. Next slide, please. So DEQ and EPA conducted remedial design and completed the cleanup remedy in 2005 using and under the Superfund process. The remedy includes three main components. They include groundwater containment, removal of highly contaminated superficial soil, and construction of a clean soil cap over the entire site, as well as a sediment cap in the Willamette River. And then creosote was also extracted from the groundwater from 1989 through 2011. Next slide, please. So in 2005, when the remedy was completed, there was a large community celebration. The governor was there, tribes participated, there was a tree planting, and once the remedy was completed, DEQ is still legally obligated by EPA to continue long-term operation and maintenance of the site. Next slide, please. So DEQ performs maintenance at the site every year and quarterly inspections. Every 5 years, there is a 5-year review, and that determines whether the remedy is protective. The 5-year reviews started, and those are under the Superfund process, but those were started in 2001, and there have been 5 previous 5-year reviews, and these will continue and occur in the future indefinitely. The last 5-year review also demonstrated that the remedy is protective. In 2025, the data collection starts for the next 5-year review, and EPA collected that initial information this spring in Willamette Cove, and then DEQ, EPA, and its contractors will perform the bulk of the work this summer. The information that we collect this summer will be compiled and evaluated and then released the fall of 2026 to the public. One thing I wanted to make sure and acknowledge is that at DEQ, we have heard from tribal and communities concerned about the current shoreline armoring along McCormick and Baxter's riverfront. And DEQ is looking for opportunities to improve that habitat along the shoreline, and that can include this PPA process. Outside of that PPA process, DEQ is continuing to have conversations with EPA and Metro and Department of State Lands as property owners about opportunities for more comprehensive in-water habitat improvements in Willamette Cove and beyond. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to introduce and let you know there are many examples of brownfield redevelopment that have occurred across the Portland area, and those properties such as Coley Park, the fields, and what we call the Alamo site near South Waterfront. Those have all been projects of redevelopment with DEQ oversight, and where people are safely using spaces as public spaces. Next slide, please. All right, thanks. On to Lorenzo.
Thank you, Sarah. Next slide, please. The legislature created the PPA program in 1995 to facilitate the cleanup and reuse of contaminated property by providing innocent parties with a release from liability in exchange for providing a substantial public benefit. Next slide, please. So where we are here in the process, we're currently in the due diligence phase of our evaluation, which includes collecting community and tribal input. The next step will be to synthesize and integrate any feedback that we've received, and then begin negotiations with Portland Botanical Garden, or PBG. If a PPA can be successfully negotiated, it will go out for formal public comment, and any comments that DEQ receives will be considered and responded to in writing. If those comments don't alter DEQ's evaluation of the project, then a PPA would be finalized. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today's webinar and the extensive community outreach that we're conducting right now is due to the significant public interest in the site, as well as the more than $70 million of public funds that have been spent on the site. Due to that, we want to provide the community with a meaningful opportunity to provide feedback on the proposal. So we're really interested in learning about the community's view on the proposal, what could be done to improve it, and what the community's just priorities for the site are. Next slide, please. So in spring of 2024, the Portland Botanical Gardens submitted a PPA application for the McCormick and Baxter site with the intent to develop the site into a botanical garden. As I previously mentioned, we're still conducting our due diligence and evaluating the proposal, which includes today's ongoing community outreach. Portland Botanical Garden will be sharing their proposal shortly, so I won't speak for them. Next slide, please. Financial considerations. There has been significant interest in financial considerations with regard to the proposal. So at a minimum, the PPA will require 2 financial elements. The first would be financial assurance. This will be required in order to ensure that any damage to the cap or other remedies on site will be repaired and adequately funded. Currently, contractors are working on those cost estimates, and so we don't have an actual figure just yet. The second element would be financial ability. This is going to be a requirement of PBG. They can demonstrate that they have the funding necessary to purchase and develop the site as proposed. One idea is to require Portland Botanical Garden to have 30% cash on hand or for the development costs, or are able to partner with an organization willing to serve as a guarantor who has the requisite funding available. Next slide. It's back to you, Michael.
All right. Thanks, Lorenzo, for that overview, and Sarah as well. So I just wanted to share a little bit more information about kind of our timeline for community input. So first, we began this whole process really towards the beginning of this year. So we began with outreach to 6 tribal governments. And we held an initial meeting with them in February. And we also had a meeting in late April as well. And we're going to share more information about that in just a moment. We also had an initial meeting in February with representatives of several community groups, groups that have already kind of been in touch with us about the site, to get initial feedback and to seek input about community outreach. Which then leads us to where we're at today with point number 3, where we plan today's meeting to provide the community a broader opportunity to hear from DEQ and Portland Botanical Gardens, and for us to hear from you and hear your questions and feedback. We also have a community survey that is live right now. And we're going to consider that input in our conversations and negotiations with Portland Botanical Gardens. We're going to throw that link in the chat as well. Going to point number 4, as we progress through the year, we're going to continue to follow up with you to share updates. We'll probably plan some future community meetings for any substantial updates that we want to share and get your input on. And we're also doing the same process with the tribes that we're in touch with. Now, getting to point number 5, if we get to a point where PPA is negotiated and we have a draft PPA ready to present to you for formal public comment, we're going to put that draft PPA out for a formal public comment period, and we're going to evaluate all comments that we receive and respond to them. And we may adjust the PPA based off of the comments. And since the site has pretty significant public interest, and because, as Lorenzo mentioned, the resources that were involved in getting it ready for reuse, we're going to host a public meeting to share details of that draft PPA and to give you an opportunity to ask us questions before that public comment period would start. While the slide does not include a firm timeline on when this process will be complete, since conversations and negotiations are ongoing, we're hoping to reach a PPA decision by the end of this year. I'm now going to invite Annie back to talk a little bit more about our tribal outreach.
How am I sounding?
You're sounding good.
Oh, good. Sorry about earlier internet issues. Yeah, so we initiated our outreach with tribes in August of last year. And the tribes listed on the screen are the tribes that we have been engaging with. These are the tribes that have been historically involved in the Portland Harbor cleanup and are invested in this site and have historic experience with the cleanup efforts at this site. So we initiated that outreach in August of 2024. And then we had our first webinar with the tribes in February of 2025. And then just a few days ago, we hosted our second webinar, very similar to this webinar with PBG. And we will be following up with the tribes to receive more feedback and see how they would like to be involved with this process.
Okay, thanks, Annie. Yeah, going into providing feedback. So again, we're actively seeking and accepting feedback from community groups and individuals, and we're trying to do this early in the process so that we can be fully informed about the community's hopes, concerns, and interests as we enter negotiations with Portland Botanical Gardens. So we're asking for that feedback here tonight and at future meetings, as well as with that survey that we got. So if it's not in the chat already, I'm going to make sure that we get that on there soon. And I'm going to email a link to that to everybody that registered for tonight, because we would love to hear your input, and we would love it if you can share that around amongst your neighbors and networks, people that might be interested in sharing their thoughts. While we say initial feedback is requested by the end of May, we're still going to be accepting feedback throughout this entire process. So don't see that as like a firm deadline where it's by the end of this month or else. It's not like that at all. But we're just hoping to collect as much feedback as quickly as possible so we can just be informed throughout these conversations. And again, we're going to continue to check back in with you as updates arise. So as we've said, we're going to be using this feedback as part of our conversations and negotiations with PBG, and that's going to inform a PPA scope of work. And I'm going to invite Lorenzo back to explain a little bit more about what a PPA scope of work means.
Yes, thanks, Michael. So scope of work is an attachment to the legal document that provides the liability protection. And a scope of work really is a list of requirements, in this case, that Portland Botanical Gardens would have to abide by to stay in compliance with the terms of the PPA and receive the benefits of the liability protection. Some of these requirements can include things like a prohibition on use of pesticides or prioritizing development of publicly accessible areas first, as a couple of examples, but that's what a scope of work is.
Okay, thanks, Lorenzo. And so just next steps, we're going to continue to collect and consider feedback from the tribes and the community as part of our conversations and negotiations with PBG. And we're going to continue to communicate back with the community. And so don't think that this is the first and only time you'll get to speak with us. This is going to be an iterative process. And we would love to know if you want to continue to receive updates from us, email updates. I know a good number of you have been hearing from me, but if you haven't, you can indicate if you want to be part of our outreach list on the survey. It's the first question, or you can do direct communication to us. I'm going to put my contact info in the chat here, or you can sign up to our GovDelivery email list. That's specifically for this topic. We're going to put a link to that sign up page in the chat as well. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this presentation. My contact info is right there. I'm going to put that in the chat. Yeah, I'm going to now, well, first, I'm going to hold for questions and answers until the end, but I'm sorry, I do see Cassie, I see you've got your hand raised. So before we move on, I really do want to hold on to Q&A and feedback until later. But yeah, thank you. We're going to want to hear from you. So I'm going to move along, and I'm going to pass this to Portland Botanical Gardens for their presentation. So Matt, if you would like to share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, DEQ team. All right. I think it's a botanical garden by the river. My name is Matt Taylor. I'm the executive director of the Portland Botanical Gardens, and I'm going to ask the rest of our team to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone.
Sorry, are we talking over each other?
It's okay.
Michael, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Geffel, doing business as Land Lab, and I have been helping PBG on the research arm of the nonprofit and also adding capacity with site planning and communications.
I'm Sean Hogan. I'm a botanist and a horticulturist and one of the founding members of PBG.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amira Streeter. I am a consultant with PBG out of Soul Street Consulting.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sierra Gardner. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Right, it worked.
Yeah.
I'm an urban planner and landscape architect, and I'm on the board of the Portland Botanical Garden.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Familiar shot, but a little background. Let's see if this is advancing. There we go. So the Portland Botanical Gardens was formed in 2020 as a 501c, although there were lots of discussions of a botanical garden in Portland long before that, and you'll hear more about that. But our mission is to bring plants and people together and provide an immersive space for knowledge, community, and collaboration. And we hope to purchase the McCormick and Baxter Superfund site in the Portland Harbor and create a fantastic botanical garden for Portland, for North Portland, and for visitors to our amazing city. So most of you, I believe, know where it is located, but just for reference, it is right between the future Willamette Cove Natural Area to the north and the University of Portland's Franz River campus to the south. And it has about 2,000 feet of riverfront. And it is adjacent to the University Park neighborhood. And Sean, you want to chime in when this slide advances?
Yeah, and even before that.
You can, yeah.
This is something that a whole group of us have been looking into for years. I remember touring this site with people from parks in 1998, and really it hasn't changed Portland's need for a public garden and for so much interpretation. So, I mean, the basic idea here is that one, horticulture and botany and sense of place is an amazing way for all of us to get together, no matter what our background, through horticulture and botany. Also, the great need to understand both the natural areas of our surroundings, our state, our region, and of course, right there on the river, and that through healing and the continued healing of a pretty important and central spot. Research, quite a bit is programmed in biological sciences, but also vocational training, extended learning, that kind of thing for local communities and, well, actually region-wide communities. And of course, some say it's passive learning, but it's all of the above. A bioregional garden, the region's first, which will take us through plant communities of the world, but primarily those of the area on site and Western Oregon in general, but a way to immerse oneself. And as an example, walking the world, also traversing Oregon, where you can walk from the redwoods through the valleys, the mountains, the northern Sonoran in the Great Basin, and up in the Rockies in the Willow Mountains. So there's a lot to pack into one very beautiful spot. And you can see here just an example of one of the world collections. So many things we can do with sort of one place. The nice thing about a biogeographic garden is that you've got plant communities and everything that would grow there together, but it also can place traditional uses in such areas, potential plants for horticulture. And as a greater research, one of the questions that's been asked is, what about the potential for invasives? And a garden with a strong scientific background is going to be the region's best screen for instance, potentially invasive plants as well. As you can see, K through 12, very early development, super important. College, we really do want to not only be extended learning, but a center of bioresearch in the region.
Yeah, and so a huge focus of this garden is the research component, and there are really great opportunities to partner with many different institutions nearby, University of Portland, For instance, we've already met with the Dean of Arts and Sciences as well as the President of UP and some faculty and discussed developing a research advisory council. There are folks from U of O who are also interested in being on that committee, Lewis and Clark, PSU. So a garden can also help bring together different researchers. And in particular, we see a really great opportunity to focus on climate change adaptation, urban ecology, and site remediation. So the images featured here, the top is student work from the University of Oregon from Jan Ginn, who I've been advising, looking at future climate scenarios on the site. And below are some environmental sensors from the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, which is one of the sites that we really hope to draw from and learn from in founding an experimental landscape. Also, community-based land care is a major priority for this site, which already has a successful restoration. And so we're going to establish test plots with community partners to collaboratively restore, research, and interpret the greenway ecosystem, still focusing on site native plants, but trying to bring in citizen science as much as possible so that it's not just academics who are conducting research, but also a really engaged community network. So
You want to give your story about how long it takes to find a botanical garden in Portland?
Well, quite a while so far. We again first looked at this site, among others, in 1998 and formed a small committee. I got involved in the Chinese garden and thought I wouldn't do that for a while, and here we are again. But it's so imperative. Portland's urban growth boundaries are certainly really important, but it also means we don't have a lot of 60 acres around to play with. And this is such a magical spot. It's in a part of the city that needs something. It's in a city that really needs something shiny. And we think we can make that happen as something that's very, very shiny.
And so this territory has been home to Chinookan people and visited by tribes from across the Northwest, who are still very connected to the river and serve as Portland Harbor Natural Resource trustees. Portland also has a very large urban indigenous community with many different nonprofits engaged in Portland Harbor restoration work and advocacy. And so, as part of PBG's proposal, PBG is proposing to partner with tribal authorities, public agencies, and conservation groups to design and steward this native riparian landscape and provide permanent public access to approximately 10 acres of greenway and shoreline. That's approximately a quarter of the land area, the upland land area. And as was mentioned earlier, we met with 3 tribes at the end of April to introduce this proposal. Tribal engagement is open-ended. There's not a deadline for when this is to be completed, and we're really excited about the feedback we've already received. So when we look further back at this site, we see it was a really different place than what is found now. It is actually marsh and backwater habitat. It's been filled since. So this is not that most helpful reference for understanding what might be happy here. However, really interestingly, just upriver and downriver were xeric prairie surveyed. And that's really, really rare to have xeric prairie along the riverbanks. Very likely anthropogenically produced through cultural burning practices. But this prairie was not recorded within the Portland metro area until further upriver than Wilsonville. So that's a really unique reference point for us.
So as everyone knows, it has an industrial history that, well, it actually stretches back over 100 years. And this is a snapshot timeline of that development, taking note that early on when it was filled to provide an embankment for the Union Pacific Railroad going alongside the river, and also the BNSF Railroad, now called BNSF Railroad, to cross both the Columbia and Willamette. And these were the first railroad bridges, and all of that development cut off the cove, as you can see, but noting that there was a sand spit, and the original integrity of the lower Willamette is showcased here with those spit islands and backwaters. So that first development evolved into a lumber mill, and then eventually, around World War II, it became the McCormick and Baxter creosoting site. But you can see it attained its current shape, the fill and the shape of the property by the 1920s. And then after almost 50 years of operating, it did declare bankruptcy. This was the Creosote Company in 1990, as DEQ mentioned, and then was declared a Superfund site in 1994, and remediation design, et cetera. And here's a snapshot you can see from after 2000, the entire site was cleaned up, and the cap in phases you can see in that first image. Simultaneously, and I think significantly for this site, is an extensive community engagement process was launched by the city to determine optimal reuse of the site. And there was quite a bit of, there was a consensus really among participants. They'd like to see some kind of open space, park-like setting. There is a note here that there were even ideas of a fish hatchery, golf course, parking, public park. But what they settled on was something that could possibly be a field for playing field for sports, or just for public park access, or some kind of combination of a commercial enterprise with open space. And so another key point in this is that as the site remediation, while it lasted, almost 10 years, there's been ongoing monitoring and maintenance, and that will go on in perpetuity.
So one of the really exciting parts about this site is that there was a really successful restoration project at the end of remediation, planting oak savanna groves, a large riparian zone along the river, as well as a dry meadow and linear bioswale. And so this site can provide some really critical insights for other restoration projects in Portland Harbor. And it's also a really unique place to establish a botanical garden that's highlighting environmental restoration and public access. So this image was produced at the same time as that last aerial photo. This is a multispectral analysis to understand photosynthesis rates, and it was done in October. So this is showing in dark green which plants are photosynthesizing the most after summer drought. And what we learned here is that oak, pine, and madrone, really xeric species associated with savanna landscapes, were the healthiest, even in the riparian zone. We're really lucky that the designers of this project included a really diverse range of species in that riparian zone. And it also makes for a really compelling landscape that can take us back to a pre-colonial condition in the Willamette Valley. And so we've been trying to understand why the restoration has favored those species. And through research, we've discovered that North Portland is drier than most of the metro area, with up to 25 inches less precipitation than the crest of the West Hills right across the river. It's also an urban heat island with evening temperatures up to 12 degrees above the city average. And then both of those factors are compounded by subsurface drainage and diversion of groundwater off and around the impermeable cap that Matt showed earlier. And so mitigating the urban heat island effect is a really important environmental justice concern. Vivek Chandas, who produced the maps below, found a really strong correlation between urban heat islands and redlining maps, for instance, not just in Portland, but in many cities in the US. And there have also been recent studies that show that botanical gardens have been found to be the coolest parts of a city. So additionally, near this site are 2 census tracts that have been identified as environmental justice census tracts, according to the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. So even though EPA's environmental justice mapper is no longer online, this is still a great tool that we can use to understand how socioeconomic factors combine with environmental factors to lead to environmental justice issues. And so while the 2 census tracts closest to McCormick and Baxter do not meet this criteria due to socioeconomic factors, they still do based on environmental risk. And then in particular, the neighborhoods of Portsmouth and St. John's also have additional socioeconomic risk. So this project will provide public river access in an area that has been given over entirely to industry. And we really look to mitigate the effects of past industrial practices through the development of this botanical garden. So most of you have probably seen this diagram. It was also shared with DEQ. The original conceptual site planning for the project broke the site into 4 areas. These are not necessarily specific hard lines, but really an idea of how the site might be organized. That there would be a main campus further back on the soil cap where there's more freedom to develop, and along the rail line, an open gathering space on top of the impermeable cap, and then interpretive native plant collections and a greenway and open river access along the river frontage. And so since then, to develop this idea, we did some scale comparisons at familiar landscapes. I think many of you have visited these landscapes. So in the top left, that's what a city block looks like. Top right, that is the Japanese garden, which of course feels even larger than that because it's within a larger park. More locally, Cathedral Park is in the bottom right. And then Tom McCall Waterfront Park is in the bottom left, showing what that would look like on this site. And so using research, site planning information, scale comparisons, we drafted some preliminary phasing ideas about how this long-term project might roll out. So the first phase, we're looking at how we can make the site a community asset in the first year. And really top priorities are beach safety improvements and riparian restoration and safety. Improving the Greenway Trail, which is already more or less accessible. There's a gravel road that's accessible, but improving that. Beginning planting on the Greenway collections and the bioregional collections. Establishing a temporary parking area so that we can begin programming, begin hosting school groups from every PPS school. And establish a research and education and operations center to get that programming going. And also we think there's an opportunity to begin test plots and citizen science. So this is an image of a project in Eugene that I worked on that was a former quarry and landfill that has been fallow for 40 years. And this is what this early phase might feel like with temporary art installations, activations, and early wildflower establishment.
So the next phase, we have coined the foundational garden because I think this will sort of look more like a botanical garden in that we will have added you know, a little more structure to it, improving the parking, but in particular, expanding the research and education and operations center as a place for active learning and also with greenhouses that can help us begin the establishment of the bioregional or biogeographic collections. Another important component is just completing the Greenway Trail and connecting it with the future Willamette Cove natural area, its Greenway Trail, which will be up along the railroad tracks and connecting right under the rail bridge there where the arrow shows. This would be an expansion of the bioregional collections and a continuation of the wildflower meadow, but really the overall shape of the garden will be established. As you can see that most of the development, as Michael mentioned, will be up along the railroad track and in the what's called the bioswale, which is part of the drainage system, but where there are already existing groves of trees. And we intend to keep as much of that as possible and continue the existing restoration plantings. And ultimately, there will be the presence of these biogeographic gardens. And I'm going to hand off to Sean here, and he can maybe tell us a little bit about what this amazing agave is that is showcased here.
Well, I think is a good example. Gardens are local, but they're also from all over. So there's a spot right now, it looks like it might be up in the upper area of the areas we've been looking that would be a biogeographic and that we can compare and contrast flora, especially other Mediterranean floras from all over the world. But within that, all kinds of interesting horticulture, because horticulture is art and art can be horticulture. So there are so many ways to interpret these things, but the art's in the garden. I think it's going to be super important. So on the right happens to be an agave that's from Mexico, only found about 20 years ago. And on the left, a mix of both native plants and a few Mediterraneans. So if you look at this sort of concept, there's a lot that will undoubtedly change between now and then, especially with more input. The areas near the Greenway will, I think, continue to be open to the public 24 hours, interpreted. And then there's that gathering space, meadow spaces, all kinds of both traditional things can happen there, but also an area with some really expansive meadows and also beautiful views from near the tracks all the way to the bridge, and in the lower left, beautiful views out over the water of the city. So certainly want to keep the view corridors, and then you can see the areas and the various shapes up there, which would be various loops and things people can take to look at the various floras of the world.
And so at this point, we're really just projecting aspirations for what might happen in a botanical garden over decades. But there is a hope that perhaps within the next 10 years that there is a conservatory there, which can host different ethnobotanically important plants that need shelter. The image on the right is from the National Aquarium in the Chesapeake Bay of floating wetlands. There's some exciting new engineering that is being explored at the Gasco site that might enable something like that, perhaps adjacent to a dock. But both of these are aspirational and would require a lot more study with a lot more consultants to really understand, and as well as consultation with tribal authorities, community organizations, and a lot of government agencies. But the Botanical Gardens Greenway is a major priority of this project. I mentioned before that it would be 10 acres of public greenway and riverfront, and some of the goals for this are a clean and healthy river, enhanced livability, a balanced relationship between people and natural functions of the river, restored fish and wildlife habitat, and sustaining quality, beauty, and safety. And we have a really great example upriver at the South Waterfront Greenway. This is actually a little narrower than what is being proposed at the McCormick and Baxter site. But on the right, you see an image that was also shared earlier showing that it is possible to vegetate below ordinary high water. There was also a lot of engineering that went into this. And so we're really excited to work with a lot of different partners to make that dream a reality. So in terms of future community engagement, so the community survey was already mentioned, that remains open. Here we are at May 8th, and we're really excited to hear feedback, incorporate feedback, and schedule follow-up meetings to continue to revise this vision iteratively. And then, of course, there will be the formal comment period if a draft PPA is issued.
And Amira, if you want to maybe talk about the community engagement moving forward, if there's an acquisition.
Yes, I can talk about this. So PBG actually created a pretty extensive and expansive community engagement plan that we are working through in order to making sure that those who are interested in this project, those who have a stake in this project, can get involved, and we can continue to have them be part of this process. That spans the gamut of environmental justice communities and organizations, to our neighbors in the area, to community members that are on this call. And we've also been talking to a number of botanical gardens across the nation and potentially the world as well, to get an understanding of their processes and how they operate. So you heard from DEQ some of the outreach with tribes and tribal entities, and just heard from Michael on the previous slide what engagement has been looking like. But on this slide, I just want to show that after acquisition, PBG is planning on having a larger community engagement outreach and process to really incorporate the input and feedback from community members like yourself. And I'm actually just looking at the chat or the Q&A and see some questions that actually align with some of the information that we're hoping to gather as this process continues. So as you can see on the screen, it looks like surveys and input forms. We are planning on designing a survey to understand what people would like to see in a botanical garden or in the botanical gardens, and how they would like to interact with the gardens as well. That includes things like ticketing, admission, being close to the gardens. What does it look like for access as well? Things of that nature. So that's going to be sort of a part 2 to our engagement and outreach after the acquisition. PBG has also been conducting a number of site visits and tours on site to showcase the foliage and plants that are already on the property right now. And that has been followed up with presentations and open houses. And we hope to continue to do that as time goes on with the planning and making sure that it's very robust.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, and then newsletters and social media as well.
Thanks, Mira. So ultimately, there's many benefits of a botanical garden. I'm sure many of you have visited botanical gardens in other cities. Portland is the only city of its size without one. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have incredible gardens already. We love our gardens in the city and also in the region. It's Oregon and Portland are world-renowned as horticultural and botanical important places. So, but ultimately we see preserving and the 3 big benefits, and environmental, economic, and community benefits. Number 1, this will preserve and adaptively manage habitat and showcase environmental healing and restoration. Number two, this will increase green jobs, workforce development, and local economic activity. This will be a destination and hopefully added business for folks up on Lombard Street and in St. John's. And then for everybody, it will be a center for learning, providing environmental education, and a center for research with a focus on endangered plant conservation and climate resilience, and frankly, a lot of other priorities that will come to our attention through this type of engagement process. So we really welcome engagement. That will be how the garden grows. And this will continue long beyond the possible acquisition. So we look forward to hearing your feedback tonight and answering questions. And I'm going to stop sharing. And I think we're ready to answer questions. Michael?
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to share my screen just once again, and then we're going to get to some of the questions that are in the Q&A. So give me one moment. So I'm just going to throw our instructional slide once again, in case anybody needs help on how to provide their input or questions. But the floor is yours. And I know we kind of went over on presentation time. So thank you for bearing with us. I think all of us in the room are comfortable with staying a bit longer than 7:30 if we need to make sure everybody has the opportunity to provide feedback or questions. So yeah, definitely don't want to end this meeting prematurely. So I just wanted to get to, we've got a few in the Q&A, and let me start with, I'm going to start with Zora and Heather's. I'm going to just kind of answer, this is going to be it's kind of a joint answer to both of y'all. You both bring up really good points, and I appreciate that. So with the survey, with it being communicated, we're not trying to just seek input just from attending this and maybe just one other meeting and filling out that. Like, no, we're open to feedback in any form that it can come. So this community engagement process really just started several months ago, and we're really looking for that input on how we could better reach communities that want to be involved, that want to ask questions and provide their input. So that is a big reason why I've been trying to connect with as many community groups as possible. And kind of through this process, I'm getting more suggestions on other groups to reach out to. And in my communications, you'll see that, a lot of times I ask, like, please share this among your networks, because you all really do have a broad audience, and you do have a really good finger on the pulse, so to speak, as to the state of the community groups or communities that you're involved in, and what their needs, interests, concerns are. And I'm really hoping that you could help spread that word as well. And in the same vein, we're certainly, speaking for DEQ, we're open to hearing your feedback and hearing your ideas on how we could be better with our outreach, and how we could maybe even collaborate on such. Zora, I know you are so creative on reaching communities, and you do a lot of important work, especially with helping out some of our most vulnerable communities. And yeah, I would love to talk with you more on how we could reach some of these groups that maybe we're not reaching. But that's the whole point of doing this type of outreach with this meeting, surveys, emails, whatever it may be. I definitely want to hear from you. So going into...
sorry, Michael, I just wanted to add on to your response to Zora and her question. Yeah. Not sure if that was directed only at DEQ, but like I just had mentioned, PBG is planning on having designing a survey and sharing that to gain more feedback on what people would like to see in a botanical garden, including some of the questions that are coming up right now. and how they would like to interact with the gardens. So on the survey that DEQ shared, there is a question about being on our list of potential folks, if you would like to be included. And we highly encourage people to engage with us and stay engaged into the process.
Okay, thanks, Amira. Appreciate that. Yeah, just to kind of wrap up what I was saying, what we're doing now, this isn't, I would say this is not a static process. I'm very open to experimenting with other ideas for outreach and seeing what may work and really emphasizing on that. So I really appreciate that question. And Zora, I would love to talk with you more if you've got some ideas. Heather, thank you for that question as well. Right now with DEQ, I'll just I'll admit it's right now, these communications have been in English. I know that's probably very likely. I'm just going to go out and say that's probably not sufficient. We certainly would be open to translating, say, our webpage and survey materials into Spanish and other languages in the community. And speaking of communities, we have been focusing mostly on the surrounding neighborhoods near the site. So open to other suggestions as well if we're not hitting certain neighborhoods that should be reached out to. And if there are other groups or languages that we need to consider, absolutely. We're open to that and we can do that work as well. So thank you for your question.
And I would like to add on to responding to Heather's question, and it's a really good one. So PBG unfortunately doesn't have any current plans to provide outreach in other languages due to capacity issues, but we will certainly take that recommendation under consideration on how to share information in other languages, including, I'm thinking maybe Spanish would be the easiest to achieve, but we understand that there are various communities that speak a variety of other languages. And so we're interested in working with trusted partner organizations and groups to share information in different languages to communities that are most invested in this project. So if there's any feedback on that, like what languages to include, we welcome that input.
Thank you, Amira. I just want to add to that it is certainly kind of a convention at most botanical gardens to provide lots of different avenues for learning. And in terms of signage, we would follow our neighbor Metro, which does an excellent job of maintaining multilingual communication in its website, et cetera. So those are kind of the gold standards, is to actually provide all of our information in accessible formats. So
Yeah, I'm really glad that Coley Park was brought up as a precedent. And also, of course, it was featured in DEQ's presentation. I actually hosted Jonathan of 2 Inc., the landscape architect that worked on that project, when I was professor of practice at U of O, and also led student tours of that site. It's really a great example of participatory design. It's also really similar to the Test Plot program or nonprofit that I previewed earlier but didn't really share in more detail. The idea of these test plots comes from a nonprofit in California, which I've been partners with in the past. The nonprofit's called Test Plot, and they lead community groups around shaping land in state parks and city parks. And usually that's focused on native planting and gardening. But their philosophy is that no test plot will be the same, no two test plots will be the same because no two community groups are the same. That was part of the intention with this community-based stewardship vision, is that interested groups, community groups, stakeholders would actually have a chance for participatory design. And that is a really similar scale to the native gathering garden at Coley Park.
Okay, thank you all. And I'm just gonna kind of cap off that question just back to the language accessibility. For future meetings, if we do get a request for language interpretation, that's something DEQ can certainly look into. Just know that that is available as well, and that's something that we would especially be open to and want to make sure that future meetings are accessible, particularly for if we get to a point of having a public meeting to discuss a draft PPA. That would be very important. So thank you again, Heather, for bringing that up. I'm gonna move on to our next question. I see some more questions in the Q&A. Thank you all for your questions. Again, also people can raise their hands if you want. The next up we've got, let's see, someone asked if PBG is planning to charge environmental justice communities to enter and utilize the Botanical Garden. So would somebody from your team like to respond to that?
Sure. This has been asked quite a bit, actually, about admission fees and cost of programming, etc. And it's our intention that this follows a similar format as many public botanical gardens, where there will be essentially an access for all policy, and in particular for both tribal groups and also any community groups and nonprofits that want to, participate in programming, but more importantly, just visit the garden. There will be either discounted admission or free admission. And again, it is actually our goal to get as many people into the garden and to experience it. And admission is, I know, kind of a hot topic sometimes because it makes some of these spaces feel exclusive. I know many of our museums and other gardens around the country have, searched for creative ways to increase access. And we would start with that as well. Just want to add, though, that it is not necessarily the biggest part of our business plan to raise funds through admission. And if there was, a donor out there that wanted to endow access to the garden, then that would never be an issue. And those sorts of facilities do exist in the world, although they are rare. But right now, our goal would be to get as many groups as possible into the garden, and that access would be, discussed and negotiated, and ultimately, our goal is to provide it. So we just want to add that there's a lot of different groups that have expressed interest in working with the garden and participating in programming and collaborating. And those are other, and as well as just the feedback recently from the different tribal authorities. So that is going to be a central part of how we grow and serve the community, is creating lots of ways to not just access, but be part of the garden.
Thanks, Matt. Can you also just, because I feel like this can segue into their next question I see from Zora, just to talk a little bit more about what does public, semi-public, and like, I guess the various designations of the space. What does that mean?
Sure. I'm happy to answer that, but Sierra, since you were instrumental in creating that incredible conceptual drawing, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, it was about the 4 different areas that we we're expressing in that conceptual drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And in
Yeah.
particular,
Did you want to,
yeah,
Michael, do you want to pull that up so that we can
I
all
can
be on
pull
the
it up.
same page?
Here, let me pull it up. Hang on.
So the idea is that the Greenway is public. Obviously, that isn't something the garden can or plans to develop on. But that is a portion of the garden that we're looking forward to stewarding for the community. It's a native botanical garden, and Sean can speak more to that. And then behind that is a semi-public area. That means like events, event space, or maybe occasionally open to the public opportunities, occasionally maybe closed off for a private event. And then behind that is the garden itself, where we would have our collection and our conservatories.
Great, thanks.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it was a long time ago that we came up with this.
Yeah, no, thank you, because it just the fine point on it is that there's going to be, in our proposal, essentially a waterfront public park. And it will be part of the gardens, and that we will be managing it. And we'll also be providing security, just to be clear. And that is the garden proper will have a fence around it, and it will be protected as the collections need to be. And it's part of just managing the garden. But that space too will have some variability, and we would be collaborating with both North Portland communities, but also citywide communities, community groups, or cultural groups to provide access to space. And examples could be, again, some horticultural themes are flower shows, horticultural meetings. It could be cultural events and celebrations, but we also will likely be renting out parts of the garden. That's a big part of botanical garden business models, is to be able to rent spaces for different events or gatherings or weddings. So that place is sort of flexible, and but the core kind of emphasis is that the garden will essentially be surrounded by public, public land or publicly accessible land. We want people to come, so.
Yeah, there is the initiative is to obviously activate, the site as a botanical garden, but of course not hinder access to the Willamette at all.
And so I'm happy to answer the next question. Thanks, Cassie, for that. Is PBG going to use a pervious surface for the upgrade to the Portland Greenway Trail? This is, it's a little complicated because a lot of the Greenway Trail is on top of the impervious cap, which is there to prevent water from percolating through the ground. And so even if it does go through the ground, eventually it's collected on top of the liner in collection pipes and then diverted off of the cap. So in that area, it is really best actually to preserve the remedy to not have a pervious trail, although that is less of an issue on the soil cap. But water management and responsible water management is an essential part of this garden because water is a primary vector of contaminants. So the surface trail, any trails will have to have water management taken into an account and diverted to a place where the water can be treated and stored and infiltrated.
And just to add that it's part of the Greenway code that it is a surface that can be accessible, for wheelchairs and other mobility challenges. So it's likely will be a paved surface. But again, that is all mitigated by the plantings around it and the solutions that we'll work on to make sure that there's no kind of overland flow and creation of erosion and other, problems that come from having impermeable surfaces. Good question. And Michael, I think we're just jumping to some questions that we can answer, unless you want to sort of grab the reins on what we should answer next. But I did see a question about public access and parking from Doug Larson, which I think is a great question because this is already, and are we collaborating with the University of Portland? I just want to kind of clarify that we have been in great discussions with the university. They've expressed an enthusiasm to have a neighbor and to help activate that waterfront that is public already, that they've built out with their Franz River campus, the Greenway, but even the parking down there. There's some parking that is reserved for the university, and then there's ample visitor parking. We would adopt a similar format and allow for public parking. And much like at OMSI, not the charge parking part, but at OMSI and other gardens, there's a public area that you can just walk into, and the garden will have that as well, where there will be, amenities, and then of course egress, directly down to the river, which will all have to be worked out with DEQ and a number of other agencies, how we provide that access in a safe and sustainable manner. So there will be public parking and there will be access to the river, and it will be coordinated very closely with the university and with the neighborhood. And that's sort of another kind of that does lead into the questions about traffic. And we have also had extensive conversations both with University Park Neighborhood Association folks and with the university on how to have a creative and unimpactful transportation plan, which will include shuttles for peak periods, and then multimodal and encouragement of walking, biking, and once the Greenway is complete, and you could park in Cathedral Park and bike down to the garden, or maybe even someday access it from the water by appropriate watercraft. So those are some of the kind of creative options that would mitigate potential traffic in the neighborhood.
Hey, thanks for that, Matt. Well, since we answered one of Doug's questions, we've got, I just want to answer his other question. I think it's more of a DEQ related one, but this is about regarding the membrane in the sheet pile containment. So with it just being a bit more than 25 years old, what does that look like moving forward in the future for this to remain protective? And I'm wondering if Sarah or Kevin would like to jump in and respond to that.
Sure. Yeah, so the membrane and the sheet pile, the containment remedy was, well, it's 20 years old now. And so that the membrane and the sheet pile were designed not to degrade. And so DEQ will continue to monitor its effectiveness as we move forward on this project.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. So looking into what is our, so for our next one, we got a question asking if the current owner supports the PPA, but like, I can't speak for the current owner, but they did sign the purchase and sale agreement with Portland Botanical Gardens, if that's any indication. But yeah, I want to emphasize that the owner of the property, which that is Charlie McCormick, they are not involved in these PPA negotiations. So he is not involved in this. This is between DEQ and Portland Botanical Gardens. So just wanted to really make that point clear. And oh, was somebody about to jump in?
Oh, I was just gonna go to Candace's question next, which it looks like is for DEQ and PBG.
Yeah, okay, so the next question from Candace, and thank you for being here, is asking for both groups about making sure that tribal engagement remains continuous and meaningful throughout this entire process, including the development process, which I think that's an important distinction. And what specific measures will be taken to incorporate tribal feedback into the final plans. And then the second part of the question is asking how these efforts will be inclusive and supportive of a community benefits agreement to ensure that the project delivers tangible benefits to the local community, especially in terms of cultural representation, economic opportunities, and environmental justice. So really good question here. I'll address, at least for the DEQ side of things, for the tribal engagement. Annie, if you wanted to add on to it, feel free to. But yeah, we are committed to continuing to consult and engage with the tribes throughout this entire process, and their thoughts and questions are being taken into account as we continue conversations with PBG, and this is very important to us. So this is something that we're continuing to speak with them. This isn't just, have 2 meetings and that's it. It's going to be a continuous process. And that feedback from the tribes, plus the feedback from the community, those are all going to be factored into our conversations and negotiations. And kind of how that plays out, that's something that like when we do have more details about what gets added into the negotiations or how we respond to specific input, that's information that I think we would be happy to share. Annie, is there anything more that you wanted to add to that?
I think the only thing, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the only thing I would add is that when we're conducting this exclusive tribal engagement process, we're just being really cognizant of tribal sovereignty and that they have their own processes for deciding whether or not something is important to them. And so although we would love all tribes to be super interested in this project, it might not be a priority for all of them. And so we're just respecting the level of involvement and capacity they have to engage with this project by continuously providing them opportunities to reach out or provide feedback. But it's, of course, ultimately their decision whether or not they choose to provide that feedback. So I just wanted to remind everyone that, everyone has their own priorities and they're running governments. So, we're reaching out. We've gotten some involvement. 3 of the 6 tribes have provided feedback. But, beyond that, we're just respecting, their level of involvement and their capacity levels. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that.
And I can respond on behalf of PBG, and others feel free to weigh in as well. But I think I would just echo what DEQ has already shared. We really are trying to engage as much as possible with the tribes and other tribal entities as well. In fact, that engagement is ongoing and continuous right now, where we've conducted some further outreach beyond what was shared earlier in the presentation. And to this, second portion of the question around the community benefits agreement, I was just going to say, I think we would be curious and open to having that conversation and understanding what a CBA would look like in terms of what the community would like to see as a benefit. We've already talked a little bit about the benefits that are available with the botanical gardens from a general standpoint, and obviously this gets to one of the other questions around, the level of green jobs and what have you, but doing a deeper dive into what exactly that will look like and what benefits will be produced is something that PBG is interested in. And Sierra, you were going to add, go ahead.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I'm not sure if a CBA is appropriate for this type of development. We are a nonprofit and we're essentially doing community benefit as part of our vision. So all of the objectives with labor, tribal governments, community groups, those are our objectives. We share those. And so we're just getting our community commitments started right now. Like this is one of our first outreaches to the community, but we're looking forward to getting more feedback, incorporating that, and then figuring it out with the community, what that's going to look like. Michael, did you want to add?
Oh, I just wanted to share a little bit of how we've begun to incorporate feedback. Again, this was very early. We had really one conversation, but it was really very constructive. And already included on the slide was the proposal to develop invasive screening criteria with stakeholders. And we're really fortunate that Sean has some experience doing this already, developing the screening criteria for the Berkeley Botanical Garden. And so that is a really great opportunity to work with different groups to make sure that we are being as responsible as we possibly can. There was a lot of discussion around the riparian zone, restoration goals, lamprey and salmon habitat, and we really share those goals. Access as well was brought up, that there is limited access and it's competitive where there is access. We also want to improve access. So anything really in that riparian zone, in the shoreline, definitely in the water, is it's not just PBG's proposal. It is going to be multiple government agencies, DEQ, EPA, NOAA, DSL, as well as tribal authorities. And it will need to be developed as a group if there's even any improvement that's going to be made. So that's, I think, one of the exciting opportunities of this project is that this is an opportunity for Portland to really work together on this land, and engaging with the tribes has just begun.
Thank you both for your answers. I see a raised hand. Preston, thank you. And you are welcome to unmute yourself and either ask your question or provide some input. Let's see, Preston, are you there? Or if you need help, feel free to let us know in the chat. But I'll just hold on for just a few more seconds. Okay. Well, Preston, right now I'm gonna lower your hand, but if you want to raise your hand back to ask your question, provide your input, just go ahead and hit that raise hand button. And if you need help with anything on Zoom, let us know in the chat, and we'll be happy to help you out there. I'm gonna go to our next question in the Q&A. Someone asked about the $70 million that has been already spent on cleanup, and how does that factor into the sale price? They mentioned that DEQ is already spent, but I just wanted to clarify that that number includes both DEQ and EPA. So Lorenzo, would you like to jump in and answer that question?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Like Michael said, DEQ or EPA actually paid the lion's share of that $70 million. However, DEQ does have a lien on the property, which exceeds the fair market value of the property right now. So DEQ and EPA would essentially split up, and that would be a discussion between DEQ and EPA in terms of splitting up the sale price or the sale proceeds from the property due to the lien.
Great, thanks, Lorenzo. Next up, Zora asked a little bit, or asked for us to elaborate more, and I think there's a PBG question about workforce development and green jobs. Who will hire? Will these jobs mainly be available to people in North and Northeast Portland, and living wages? So, yeah, if anybody from your team would like to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, that's a great question. Gardens are labor intensive, and some gardens around the country, about the scale of what we're proposing, can have 50 to 70 employees, and they would be hopefully very, well-paying jobs. Obviously, a lot of that is ultimately determined by, the success of the garden, but most botanical gardens also have an array of workforce opportunities that some are internships, some are apprenticeships, some are embedded in just an educational experience. And then there's a lot of opportunity for volunteering as well. But one of our big intentions is to develop workforce training around land care. And Sean, you have some good insights around how that could evolve. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I think there are several things. One, the horticulture industry is huge here. It is a big employer, but it's also one where the training and background, there's a huge disparity. So the idea is that we can have a really large part of our own population learn all the skills there are in capital G gardening, horticulture, and that can elevate a lot of people into sort of owning the industry a lot more than happens right now. And I think that's going to be really important. And we intend to have one of the best gardening schools in the country. Unfortunately, right now, that's not saying much, but we really want a huge percentage of our population to become part of this sort of plant nerd community that is around us in Portland, and we want the skills to follow.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, some early opportunities. PBG can work with ERCO as soon as acquisition happens. That can be part of the initial training right at the get-go. And gardening at a botanical garden is highly skilled. And so it requires training. And then also it requires the compensation that goes with that training. I can't speak to, who will be hired or whether those jobs will be restricted to certain parts of the community. But a gardening wage, a highly skilled gardening wage, just working for yourself can command $50 an hour. And so it can be a real great opportunity for people once they have that skill to continue to move up in their career.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm just moving along. There's some more questions for PBG. So next up, Lisa asks about the geese that use the area to rest and feed when they migrate, and will the open area allow for this? And if any wildlife biologists, if they've provided any input.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this. A large portion of the proposal remains meadow, which will still provide really important habitat for migratory birds. In fact, there probably will be a more diverse palette of food available to them. And Canada geese in particular tend to come in during our cooler months if they're not resident geese. And these geese seem to be the same. And so there's not a huge conflict there. We have been leading tour groups, as was mentioned earlier. One such group was the Regional Habitat Connectivity Working Group, also known as RICWIG, which is part of the Intertwine Alliance. And one of the main goals of that group was to discuss wildlife habitat and migration options, knowing that this is part of a very large greenway when you zoom out and look at the entire overlook bluff. And also to discuss some of the challenges with that, because certain elements of the remedy really need to be protected. And so, for instance, like burrowing animals can compromise the remedy and can't really be allowed in all places, or I'll say many places. So this is an important balancing act, just like waterfront access, where the garden can provide even improved habitat benefits, while at the same time, we need to always recognize that the remedy needs to be protected in perpetuity.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to move to Lisa has another question, and maybe you or someone else want to chime in, but she asks, how are you going to decide what plants you'll have, and making sure that non-native species don't become invasive? And is there consideration about reducing or just kind of thinking about the exotic plants portion and increasing native woodland riparian habitat restoration for the garden so that native animals and other species can be supported?
Yeah. It's a great, actually, thank you, Lisa. The kind of echoing part of the prior question as well is have, ODF and W and other biologists looked at this. This is probably the most studied site in the harbor, and it has, both research attached to it and all the monitoring and reporting that was required because it's a Superfund site, but ultimately because part of its remedy was to create that fairly lush riparian habitat in the restoration planting. And so, yes, a lot of biologists have looked at this and have made, determinations. But more importantly, that is our goal. We want to create and sustain as much habitat as possible. And one key component of this is we are in conversation with other property owners, both Metro, the university, but also the city, and thinking of that mile of riverfront as a continuous corridor of habitat, which is even more important really than what we might do on that site, is to be part of a collective effort to both restore and increase that habitat health. And so just an example is also with the railroads. And there are initiatives with the railroads to help improve habitats along their corridors for pollinators and for native animals, but also ultimately for the health of the ecosystem. So we have measured that it's over 200 acres of connected riparian forest and associated uplands that are potentially protected both with our proposal and also the ongoing efforts of the university and Metro. So there's really an opportunity to kind of make it better, and that would be our full intention.
I think I can chime in there a little bit.
Yeah.
So again, we can serve as a regional screen for potentially invasive plants,
Right.
whether they ever made it into our collection or not. But in general, somebody was asking me about that on the site, and I was looking above their shoulders onto the bluff, which is a sea of Portuguese ivy and blackberries and geranium lucidum and other things that are quite handily creeping onto the site. So we also are anxious to rid it and the surrounds of some of these really noxious invasives and get it back to as close to natural as possible.
Also, just one more note on the riparian restoration focus. This is such a huge opportunity to continue to restore this riparian zone because it's proving to be a really unique ecosystem. Um, and because of the heat, because of drought, this may be a preview of the Willamette Valley in 20 to 40 years when you look at future climate scenarios. So understanding what really thrives in that riparian zone has the potential to really restore many more acres of habitat than this site itself. And that is really part of the mission here when it comes to adaptively managing the existing plants.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for those answers. We've got two questions kind of related to the same. I think they're both pretty similar questions about regarding funding. About what funding has PBG secured to date for acquisition, and about let's see, about meeting funding secured to date. I guess they're both, how much funding have you secured to date for acquisition and future ongoing maintenance?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. We're fundraising actively. We've raised and spent almost $250,000 on this, project, on the PPA and the purchase and sale agreement, et cetera. We have soft pledges over $3 million for a potential acquisition, even though there is not a price determined yet. There is, the financial benefit requirement or financial ability requirement that was mentioned by DEQ. So all of those add up to, of course, millions of dollars also to develop the garden itself. And again, we are in the really learning phase of developing, estimates and projections, et cetera. So, our fundraising has largely been through private donors, but we are seeking grants and we are collaborating actively now on grants. And so, and then another component of this has been the tremendous pro bono and donated value in kind services and resources, which have amounted to almost comparably about $250,000. So we've raised that amount over the last year and a half. And then, funding for the future maintenance and, operation and any kind of additional restoration, et cetera, that's all part of the garden budget. And gardens, around the country range from, $2 million annual operating budgets to $50 million. Our projection right now is just in scale with the site and the region, and kind of a comparable amount of funds need to be raised to develop it. So looking at something like the Japanese garden or even the OMSI or the zoo, those are big capital campaigns, and we will be launching those once we have the property secured. So we're not actively receiving funds to pay for those things. We're receiving pledges. But we are raising enough to complete this process. And we've also, we've done our own analysis and with consultants around the capacity of our donors to be able to fund the final acquisition and, have startup money. So we are right now trying to raise about $6.5 million as a complete package for both startup funding, initial capital costs, any additional restoration or other factors that might come out of this process. So again, it's a kind of, we are in a negotiation primarily with DEQ around what those costs will be. But we are, as a nonprofit, and also kind of a key factor with botanical gardens, but also a lot of nonprofits that, operate a facility, or, something like OMSI or the zoo. But botanical gardens around the country generally raise almost half of their money off of just donations. And sometimes it's a member model, and sometimes it's just campaigns to fundraise. And then there is a portion of funding by admission or program fees. And then a very significant amount is often raised through grants. And, that's part of our strategy in being a resource for research and ongoing, education, because we know that there's funding for that. So that's kind of our basic approach. It's very conventional, very similar. A number of folks on our team have both, run gardens and worked in gardens, and there's quite a bit of, anticipation that we would be able to thrive, based on those models. So to date, though, we've raised, like I mentioned, about almost $250,000, and then almost another $250,000 in donated services. So.
Hey, thank you, Matt. And I know we're a bit over time, so we're going to try to get through the open questions. We got a few more. So if anybody has any questions, like, throw them in now. We want to try to get to your questions, but I also want to let y'all know that this is not going to be the only opportunity that that you get to speak with us. Anyways, since we're talking about money, I would first like to see, I don't know if there's anything DEQ would like to add on to that, what I was just talking about, but also I wanted to address the question about Micah had about the current dollar amount of the lien that DEQ holds on the property. So yeah, anyone from DEQ would like to jump in,
Sure.
talk money.
Yeah, I can talk about the lien. So the lien represents the cost of DEQ's expenditures to date, and it's about just under 7 million right now.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. So that, it's 7 million.
And again, to clarify, you might have just mentioned it, but so that's the cost to date from us.
Yeah, so that's the cost to date.
Gotcha. Thank you. Looking through. Okay, we've got another question about planting and species. So Sam asks, will PBG be planting species from points south along the West Coast to help with human-assisted species migration, given the rate of climate change we're experiencing? Seeing that historically native plants might not be necessarily best adapted to our future climate, however tragic that may be. So I guess how is PBG accounting for climate change and how our future climate may be in your plans? That's a really good question, Sam.
I can certainly take that one on. We certainly want to be if not the center for examples of climate resilient horticulture here. For instance, climate resilient trees. Most of our native species did not evolve with freeway overpasses anyway. So we've created a heat island regardless of the coming climate. This is where to some degree personal package, I don't know, gets involved, where I think we need to be very careful about assisted migration of plants. I think providing corridors and natural habitats so things can provide migration when plants have to or can, and certainly birds will do a lot of that as the climate changes. But I think any introduction of a plant, assuming that it would go into the wild, is going to be something we'll look at very, very carefully.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, the projections for, like for instance, ideal Douglas fir habitat are really terrifying. In 50 years, the projection is that there will be no prime ideal Douglas fir habitat in the state of Oregon. So it's a huge question. This is definitely where research partnerships will have to factor in. From our own research, we have found that this site appears to be similar to parts of the Umpqua Valley, based in plant performance, but also in heat, precipitation rates, hardiness zone. To some extent, the traversing Oregon collections will have some species, endemic species to the siskiyous, for instance. But to Sean's point, we really want to be cautious about introducing anything that may escape without really understanding the potential risks, and especially anything within the floodplain, especially anything in the riparian zone. That is where we'll have to be the absolute most cautious. The floodplain was mentioned earlier. The 100-year flood is entirely below the top of bank. The 500-year flood does appear to affect a portion of the site, mainly the southern portion of the site, but the greatest risk to dispersal of plants through a flood would be in that riparian zone.
Thank you. That is our last open question. So if anybody else, and thank you everyone for bearing with us. I know we're like 20 minutes over, so appreciate everyone for being here. So if anybody else has a question or just a point of feedback, we would love to hear that now. Feel free to raise your hand, throwing it in the chat or anything like that. And but in the meantime, and if somebody does throw something up, I'll stop myself, but I'll just provide some closing remarks here. So just first wanted to really thank everybody for their participation tonight, not just tonight, but for the entire time that folks have been involved in this topic. One of which is Cassie. I see you raised your hand, or did you? It went away. So okay, Cassie, you can unmute yourself.
No, the timing wasn't good. That's why I lowered
okay.
it. Michael, you can say your closing comment. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you for being here. It's good to hear from you. But okay, so anyways, folks, yeah, thank you for everybody for your feedback again. We have that survey out there. We really want to hear from you, and not just about what your thoughts, hopes, and concerns are for the site, but what could we be doing better for outreach and hearing from you. So there's already had some really good input and insight that we got from today and previous meetings. And also just want to let you know that Portland Botanical Gardens are going to be also doing more community outreach. So you'll hear from them. I would suggest that if you want to be on their outreach list, go to their website. They probably put some info in the chat here, and they might want to say something as well. So please engage with them to really hear more about what their plans are and to ask them about their ideas and plans and such. But before I sign off here, I do see a raised hand. Micah, you're welcome to unmute.
Yeah, I had thanks. I had a follow-up question to my last question, and the question is, if the 7 million is not satisfied by the purchase price, what happens to the remainder of that lien? Does it stay with McCormick? Does it pass to PBG? Does it go away?
I
hope
can
it's not
field that question. So that's still an open question and up for negotiation right now. It could, all of those scenarios could be accurate. It could essentially evaporate or dissolve. We could request, like a one-time cash payment from PBG for the balance or less. There's a number of different options, so that hasn't been decided yet.
Okay, thanks, Lorenzo. Thanks, Micah. I'll just, before we sign off for the night, just wanted to see if Portland Botanical Gardens, if any of y'all wanted to provide any closing remarks.
I just want to say thank you, both DEQ and everybody participating. And it's terrific feedback and questions. And, we'll try to continue to provide further answers both through the website and, articles that we're publishing on Instagram, and we post them also on the website because I'm old-fashioned. And ultimately, we look forward to also meeting with different groups that want to be part of the garden or have further questions. And the easiest way is to email info@portlandbg.org. And that does go to a group of us, and we'll respond. And also, there's opportunities in the future to both volunteer or learn more. And again, either signing up for our newsletter or just emailing us. And then we'll get back to you and we can talk more. So that's really been what we've been doing for over a year now, is trying to have meetings with different stakeholders who are interested. And ultimately we can, if you're really interested and want a tour, we've been scheduling those. And I'll be working with DEQ to provide some more open-ended tours for anybody from the public to come and look at the site and see what we have in mind, and kind of see for yourself. But ultimately, we want everybody to come to this garden if it comes to fruition, and find ways to be involved with it. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. Again, we're going to sign off for the night. Really appreciate, again, everybody's time and attention on this matter. Again, materials and resources from tonight's conversation, we're going to upload that to DEQ's website pretty soon, shortly after this. So I've got everyone's emails that registered. So follow up with these materials, and next steps will be coming to your inbox shortly. In the meantime, thank you again and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.